I met my first serious boyfriend in my final year of college, and the first few months of our relationship were some of the happiest times of my life. Little did I know that our breakup the following year would result in him basically stalking me for 4 years afterwards. He made my life absolute torture for almost 5 times as long as we were actually a couple. And over time, someone I loved most in the world became someone I hated and feared with all my heart. A few months into our relationship, he started to display some increasingly possessive and controlling behavior. It was subtle at first. He'd asked if I'd done my workouts, then gently chide me if I'd been too busy to do them. He'd insist on knowing exactly what I was doing on any given day, and he repeatedly made comments on whatever I was eating, exclusively positive reinforcement, but that somehow made the whole thing even creepier. The fact that he was treating me more like a child or a pet than a girlfriend. I didn't just want to jump ship. I was really into him, and practically every young adult novel I'd read involving romance recommended honesty and communication. So, that's what I tried to do. Just warn him off that kind of controlling or patronizing behavior because it was super off-putting. At first, he seemed like he was completely incapable of taking any criticism regarding his behavior, which was yet another red flag. Yet when I assured him I'd be packing my bags if he didn't start treating me like an adult, he relented and promised to be better, but not without what was essentially a miniature temper tantrum. I just put it down to the shock of me threatening to leave. Like, it had upset me just to think about too, but still, if I'd have been as wise and world-weary as I am now, I'd have left him as soon as he began to beg. For about a month after, he was true to his word. He stopped being so possessive and let me live my life unhindered. Yet slowly but surely he started acting in the same old way, and that's when it became clear that it wasn't so much that he couldn't change. He just didn't want to. I knew the only way to proceed was to just be brave and break up with him so I could move on with my life. The breakup in itself was pathetic in the extreme. He cried and screamed and begged to the point where I wondered where the man I fell in love with had disappeared to. It took a while, but in the end he accepted. A full week went by without us talking, and I honestly thought that was the end of it. But as it turned out, it was only the beginning. At first, when we got back in contact, his behavior and demeanor seemed like nothing more than the regular pining of a spurned lover. He'd tell me he missed me, get angry when I didn't reply and send a wall of abusive text, then follow up by sending gifts to my job, like embarrassing me in front of my coworkers was somehow going to suddenly win me over. I thought this might last for a week or two at most. If I just maintained my policy of no contact, then he'd eventually lose interest and move on. But he didn't. Every time his texts and calls died down long enough for me to start hoping, they'd start right back up again as frenetic as ever. It was a real pain to change my phone number, but in the end, I had no choice. For a while that brought a measure of peace, but instead of giving up, my ex just upped his game. It started when I just so happened to bump into him at the Publix near my apartment. I put the first encounter down to chance, but he didn't make a scene or anything. We just exchanged looks and moved on. But then I started bumping into him on the way home from work too, and whenever I took my dog for a walk, and whenever I went for a run. And I realized it was never just us bumping into one another. He was actually stalking me. Confronting him about it did nothing, and the restraining order I filed was rejected until I returned with photo evidence of us bumping into one another at a multitude of different locations. But even when I got it approved by a judge, he kept the minimum distance of 100 feet, just watching me from afar. He basically was saying to me, I could do anything I want. I'm right here, and you're right there. And when that message finally came through, I knew I had to just pack my life up and move across the city. I even managed to get a transfer to a different branch of the company I worked for. But still, he somehow managed to track me down. I repeated the entire process a couple of months later, only this time, I moved entire cities. Granted, the other city was only like 50 miles away, so I could easily visit friends and family on weekends, but it was still a big move. Honestly, though, I was willing to do whatever it took at that point to be rid of my ex, and that meant purging my online presence too. Yet somehow he kept getting a hold of my number and my address. Like it got to the point where I became intensely paranoid, getting it into my head that a close friend or family member was passing on my information, maybe for money, maybe out of fear for their safety. I actually threatened to sue the company that prints out state phone books, and they insisted that they delisted me, but still I kept getting calls from my ex. Towards the end of the 4th year, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't concentrate at work. I was a shadow of my former self. And it all crept up so slowly that I didn't realize how bad things had gotten until I fainted at work. I was offered long-term sick leave, but since the sick pay wouldn't be nearly enough to actually cover my expenses, I had no choice but to carry on with my life, even though I feared it might end at any moment as a result of my own poor health. Just then, 2 months shy of his stalking having lasted a full 5 years, a friend of mine forwarded me a news story involving misuse of resources at the National Tax Office. Staff members were using insider knowledge to find themselves and their immediate families enough tax loopholes to pay a trifling amount each year, which was obviously highly illegal. But one of the names listed in the story was one I was very, very familiar with. It was my ex, and although there was every chance he was committing the same tax fraud as the others, I knew he was abusing his position for another reason entirely. That's how, no matter how hard I tried to move on with my life, he was always able to get a hold of my updated contact details by looking up my freaking tax returns and other such paperwork. He and his coworkers were looking at lengthy prison sentences for what they'd done, and it seemed like finally I'd get the peace I'd been craving for so long. It might only be for a number of years until he could get out and find me again, but at least it would provide some measure of relief. Little did I know that this peace would turn out to be permanent, as my ex obviously couldn't face the time. He took his own life before his sentencing hearing. I'm not ashamed to say that I wept with utter relief once I heard the news. I know that sounds cruel, but you have to put yourself in my shoes. That man made my life the worst it's ever been for the longest time it's ever been that way. He made any kind of romantic relationship impossible, and those were the best dating years of my life, just burned away because he couldn't handle seeing me with anyone else. He wasn't sad at the losses he'd caused me, so I won't be sad about the losses he'd caused himself. It was throughout his own pathological stubborn and possessiveness that he came to find himself in such a situation. And if you ask me, he got everything he deserved. Everything. Ironically, one of the most horrifying true urban legends is perhaps one of the least known, at least in the US anyway. Because up in Toronto, Canada, almost everyone has heard the story of the leaping lawyer. According to the story, one well-to-do lawyer was overly keen on showing off all the features of his extravagant office space. Set into a huge glass skyscraper, the firm who made the huge plate glass windows of the office boasts that their windows were unbreakable, and that it would take a shot from an artillery gun to successfully shatter them. Apparently, this well-to-do lawyer was a fan of proving them right, and had a rather terrifying office party trick that he often used to wow his guests. Right when the party was in full swing, he would take a running jump at the plate glass windows after announcing, "Goodbye, cruel world." Those in attendance would scream in horror as the lawyer leapt towards the window, only to be met with his hysterical laughter when he harmlessly bounced off the toughened, polished glass. Over and over, the lawyer repeated his death-defying stunt, until one day, the unthinkable happened, and the unbreakable broke. The lawyer reeled up, ran at the glass, thrilled by the accompanying screams of the uninitiated. But as his large, speeding body came in contact with the glass, it shattered. Instead of turning around to laugh at those who had fallen for the prank, the lawyer was only met with the sound of his own screams as he plummeted 20 stories down to his death. It's an urban legend that has everything. The impossible is possible. The arrogant are punished, and it's about as theatrical as urban legends get. Yet perhaps the real horror only comes when we learn that the entire story is completely and utterly true. After completing an engineering degree before attending law school, Gary Hoy took a job practicing corporate and securities law in the eastern Canadian city of Toronto. He worked for a firm known as Holden Day Wilson, a law firm located on the 24th floor of the Toronto Dominion Centre. Then on July 9, 1993, Hoy happened to notice someone giving a tour of the office to a group of articling students from a nearby university. Like he had done many times before, he attempted to demonstrate the strength of the structure's window glass by slamming himself into a window. So, in order to give the students a good fright, Hoy took his usual run-up and slammed into the plate glass. This is where the urban legend differs from the true story, as it turns out the glass was indeed unbreakable and remained unshattered even on the day of Hoy's death. Instead, some rusty old screws, tired of Hoy's continual abuses, simply dislodged and allowed the window pane to slip out of place. Right there, in front of the completely unsuspecting students, Gary Hoy screamed as he slipped through the gap in the floor and the window, plummeting 24 stories to his death. The building's structural engineer Bob Greer was contacted by the Toronto Star for comment. When he learned of Hoy's folly, he was quoted as saying, "I don't know of a single building code in the entire world that would allow a 160-pound man to run up against a window like that. He must have been out of his freaking mind." In another interview, the glass company who made the panes was quick to state that the windows didn't actually break. "We just want to make that clear. It popped out of its frame. That's what caused Mr. Hoy to fall. Shoddy workmanship, not our product." Holden Day Wilson never recovered from Hoy's death, and it was definitely one of the factors that contributed to the firm's eventual closure less than 3 years later. At the time, it was the largest law firm closure in Canadian history, but national newspapers seemed to forget that Hoy's death even occurred. The firm's closure was blamed on mismanagement and financial discrepancies, and the fact that Gary's ghost had haunted all those that had witnessed his death was totally ignored. Maybe that's because the story became so frequently mentioned in fictional media, referenced so heavily on TV and in film, that people just assured it was the fabrication of some overly imaginative writer. And we can understand why. The tale is truly a horrifying one, something we'd rather tell ourselves didn't happen rather than facing the bone-chilling truth that a man really did end up taking his own life, all because of a dumb prank. I'm a bartender, and to me, bartending is about so much more than just serving drinks. It's about community. So you can only imagine how heartbroken I was when the pandemic hit and we were basically forced to just close our doors indefinitely. I tried to find other sources of income. I even tried running a cocktail delivery service for a while. I did okay, but just not nearly enough to live comfortably. I was looking at having to sell my car, pawn a guitar or two, but the final straw came when it looked like I might have to put my dog up for adoption. I can put up with a lot of nonsense, man, but the idea of having to take Ripper to the pound, never. I just couldn't. That's when I got desperate enough to consider something pretty drastic. To make it clear, I'm a guy in my late 20s, not completely awful looking, but definitely not Brad Pitt. So I'm sure it'll come as no surprise to many of you when I say that my financial salvation came when I started yep, you sure could guess it, an OnlyFans account. It all started when I heard two of my friends talking about dad bods. Dad bods, I remember saying. You'd for real prefer a beer gut to a six-pack? Okay, not like a beer gut, she said with a giggle, but I don't know, the slightly out-of-shape look, it just feels real, and besides, gym rats just don't seem fun, you know? Dad bods are chill. That was probably some bad phrasing on my part, but you get the picture. The whole dad bod thing had been around for a while, but when I told the girl she must have something of a niche interest, she just laughed. Nope, it's way more popular than you think. and she brings up this OnlyFans profile of some Nick Offerman looking dude who had like a ton of posts up, all with a buttload of likes and comments. This guy makes thousands of dollars a month. His profile is free to sub too, but he does a bunch of request stuff too. Watch. I'm like, no. Thinking she's about to show me this guy's junk or whatever, but no. Apparently the guy did like tuck you in videos or good morning sweetie videos where he pretends to wake up next to you before offering you breakfast and stuff. It was the tamest adult content imaginable, legitimately PG-13 stuff, and he was charging upwards of $50 for a personalized video. The whole rest of my shift, I kept thinking about that guy, thinking how happy he must be to get all this money, and his following was so wholesome too. What's not to like about a setup like that? Sure, I bet there was some steamier stuff behind a paywall somewhere, but come on. A few $1,000 a month just to tell some girl to sleep well? Why couldn't I get a piece of that sweet, sweet OnlyFans money? But nah, I'm not that guy, or at least I wasn't. I had all the confidence of a 2-day-old fawn back then, but then again, I suppose desperation drives us to do stuff out of the ordinary. It was pretty surreal setting up the account. Like I had to come up with a fake name and an attractive username. I had to take a display picture selfie and banner picture. It was a whole thing. I was doubting myself the entire time, but I still went and did it, and since all the pictures were as anonymous as I could make them, those masks helped to protect more than just my breathing, I suppose. I wasn't all that concerned about getting found out. Besides, that would pretty much be the end of the whole thing. It wasn't like I was going to actually get any followers or anything, right? Right? Well, wrong. Because maybe 3 days after, just when I was starting to forget about the whole thing, I get an email notification from OnlyFans that says like, user 7876 is now following you, just to be as generic as possible. I'd set up my sub fee to $4.99, then when I checked the payout section, boom, like $4 was headed into my bank account at the end of the month as an upfront charge. I also had a direct message that just read, "Loving your pictures, can't wait to see more, X." I couldn't tell who the person was. There was no bio on their account, nothing to even clue me into if they were male or female, but still, I just reply, "Thank you so much. If you know anyone who might enjoy my content, please share my profile with them." I get a "will do" in return. Then that's that. A few days later, I get another sub, then another, and by the end of the week I have a grand total of 10. Loyal but totally anonymous subscribers. The extra $40 a month was paying for most of Ripper's dog food by that point. Not the good stuff, but I didn't have to consider giving him up anymore, and that meant you can bet your butt I carried on posting. If the only way was up, then up I was going. By the end of my 6th week of OnlyFans, I had just short of 50 followers and was making just under $200 a month, and I put that down to solely me opening myself up to special requests. A lot of them came in the form of daddy stuff, which is undeniably kinky, but still mostly just sweet and affectionate. I didn't have a problem with it at all, and once I gotten a little confidence under my belt, I'd go so far as to say that I got pretty good at it. But as it turned out, the real money was in a kind of domination that was considerably less wholesome. Some people didn't want me to just be nice to them. They wanted me to be really, really mean. I remember the first time I started to feel really disillusioned with the whole thing. One special request wanted me to make a video where I basically just downright was abusive. Then when I read that they wanted me to call them all kinds of slurs, I just felt gross. It was the first time I'd had actual confirmation that some of my subscribers were gay guys, but that wasn't really it. It was the things they wanted me to call them. They're what made me feel deeply uncomfortable. I replied to the DM saying, "Sorry, I can't do that. Is there anything else I can work in for you?" But no. The reply was almost instant, and it consisted of them just doubling the dollar amount they were offering. The first time they did that, I actually got a little offended. Did they honestly think that I'd just cave because they flashed some cash? It was about principle, not making money. So you can guess how straight up gross I felt when they threw a 4-figure amount at me. And I feel gross just typing this, but yeah, I accept it. I called them some of the most despicable things that have ever come out of my mouth. And you know, I did a pretty good job of it too. I wanted that money, and it's honestly shameful how quickly I abandoned my principles. I felt bad, really bad for like a few days, but when another offer came in from a different user asking the same thing for the same price, I just couldn't say no. The bar wasn't even paying us any sort of unemployment anymore. We were like 3 months into lockdown and the money just sort of dried up. So by then, whether I liked it or not, I was almost entirely dependent on OnlyFans for my income. And when the requests got worse, I had little choice but to fulfill them. Looking back, I shouldn't have let it escalate. I could have kept things at the level they were at and still lived pretty comfortably until the New York City bar scene opened up again. But no, my greed took over, and at one point, I bought an entire pack of wet Italian sausage just so a guy could imagine what his junk would look like after I stamped on it in steel-toed work boots. I thought this was as bad as things would get. I was wrong. The red line event for me was getting a follower from another user 827484 style account, the anonymous kind you always get the weirdest DMs or requests from. The guy threw an obscene dollar amount at me, but also mentioned that some of that money was for procuring materials, as he put it. Long story short, this person wanted me to head down to an apartment building where a Hispanic lady was selling puppies. I was to go down there, pick one up, then bring it back to my apartment. I asked why, but they wouldn't tell me. They just gave me some spiel about being genuine and being a huge source of potential income in the future. But this was a puppy. Nothing good could have come out of mixing OnlyFans and baby animals. And what do you know? I was right. I won't go into too much detail about what this user wanted me to do, but it was some of the most evil, heinous stuff I'd ever heard. They wanted me to hurt the puppy. Not just kill it. Hurt it. Over the course of days, maybe even weeks from some of the stuff that they were DMing me. When I outright denied their request, the threats began. Whenever I blocked an account, another one would pop up and pay the sub fee, knowing it would be returned when I inevitably blocked them. And by the time I started getting scared that this person or group of people I could never tell would get a hold of my contact details, I had to be brave enough to just click that little delete profile button and face the music. So, I'm currently living with my mom and her boyfriend out here in New Jersey. I can't actually describe how much it sucks to be living in a garage with my 30th birthday fast approaching, but I also know my life could be so much worse. Every time I miss Williamsburg, every time I miss having my bank account being padded for next to no work at all, I just look over at Ripper, give him a pat and think, yeah, COVID has sucked. It's ruined a lot of lives, including mine. But at least, I have my pupper.